want to have you explain your journey of how you got to publication day last week because um, I think people don't talk enough about the ins and outs of it. And there's a lot of our subscribers and a lot of people on Substack are just very invested in writing, obviously. So I think they'll be interested to hear that. But for everyone that's joining us, I want to just thank Brian Schaefer, who has joined me today. He's a journalist and an arts writer. He writes about dance regularly for the New York Times for the last 12 years. He also contributes to other magazines, I think the New Yorker, New York Magazine. I first met you back in 2012, so a while ago. We were both in Tel Aviv. You were actually a reporter for Haaretz, which I'm not good at Hebrew, so hopefully that's enough. Uh, I actually went online to listen to how to say it correctly, and anyway.
It's
Um,
Haaretz, but who
yeah,
cares?
there you go.
Yeah.
And then we worked together. You wrote about dance and other things for me over the years. And now you are a debut novelist. Congrats.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Um,
5 as of last week.
yeah, it was
So
released.
crazy.
Town and Country, show people who haven't seen the cover of the book yet. Town and Country came out November 4th, which was election day, which was a very exciting day for many people here in New York and around the country, in Virginia, New Jersey, and other places. So people are calling it an election novel, but it's really a whole bunch more. So first, thanks, Brian. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's this was exciting, and you're my first Substack live, so
Yeah.
also very cool.
Hopefully not the last. It's fun.
Uh,
Um, yeah, so I mean, it's an election novel because it does take place from Memorial Day to Election Day. But it's so much more. I mean, this is an ambitious book. I was reading, I was like, whoa, I didn't know we were going to do all of this. You have so many characters, so many POVs. There's so much nuance when you're dealing about opioid addiction. You're dealing about class differences. You're talking about trauma from the AIDS epidemic. Class differences, homophobia. There's everything is in this book.
Yeah, if when you put it on paper and you look at the number of characters whose minds I enter and whose experiences we follow, and on top of that, all the different topics that are covered, I think if I had seen that written out as I embarked on this project, I think it would have been way too intimidating, way too daunting. And I think from a publishing perspective, I think if I knew what I know now, I think the idea of trying to pitch a 6-character point of view novel to agents and an editor, that would not be the recommendation of pretty much anybody in the industry. But it also all unfolded organically when I realized that this was a story that was going to examine a congressional race and that it was going to look at the relationship between a local family and a group of gay second homeowners. Part of the project was to explore it from so many different angles. And because I wanted to create a robust portrait of this community, I had to address all the different parts of it and all the different ways that this family and this group of friends and this whole community, how each of their experience is colored by different aspects of it, and each of them shift and their perspectives are changed through various interactions. And so you're right. I mean, it is an election novel in the sense that it follows an election, and it's a political novel in the sense that, of course, anything that deals with a political race is going to be political. And at the same time, I don't consider it a novel about politics, and it's not a novel about an election. It really is about how politics is kind of the water that we all swim in. And so each of us, whether we choose to are conscious of it or not, we're responding to the political dynamics around us. And the election just gave me a great structure. It gave
Right.
me an opportunity to put these two groups into heightened conflict. So there's a lot, structurally, thematically, narratively, that the election gave me that I think
Yeah.
is why I latched onto it. Mostly because it allowed me to enter these ideas that I wanted to explore about what it means to be a neighbor and the loyalties that we have in our families and our friendship groups and in our politics.
Well, you wrote a piece that you published on LitHub where you explained that originally you thought, oh, yeah, it's going to be a satire. It's going to be a satirical novel. And I love that. at one point you said your husband was reading your work, which is great because not everybody's partner wants to hear the work all the time. And eventually broke it down for you and said, "You're not a satirist. It's just not your mode of processing the world, and it's not serving the story." I mean, obviously, it's a paraphrase. He probably just said, "This isn't working." No, tell me about that. Like how you went from realizing like you were going to be more authentic, more earnest. I mean, the New York Times review, which I'm sure you read, didn't seem to appreciate that you were so optimistic and compassionate and empathetic, which I really loved that part. So if I were reviewing it, would have been nicer.
Thank you. Yeah, the review was interesting, and interesting because of what it seemed to expect of a novel, and also kind of taking what what this novel is and the way that I approached it, and which is the fact that it takes place in a fictional town in an undefined state in an
Griffin,
undefined year. So in Griffin, correct?
yeah,
Which is
with the Hudson
just
Valley,
a
correct?
I mean, of course, inspired by the Hudson Valley, like, I'll fully own that. My husband and I split our time there, but on the page in the book, it is just a trendy rural town 2 hours from a major city, and one of the reasons why I made that choice is because there are so many of these all across the country, and readers
Right.
have already been sharing, "Oh, this reminds me of, even a town in Texas, California, Tennessee, for like, it's just all over. Everybody has a small town just outside a major urban center where these dynamics are really alive,
Where
and I
the gays
want
are coming
readers.
and rejuvenating.
Exactly. So I wanted people to imagine whatever town is close to them,
Yeah.
and at the same time, I wanted to strip it of our normal associations that we automatically bring either geographically or politically, and so I set it in an undefined year so that these people aren't responding to the national politics of the moment. They don't have to answer to a particular policy or position or even a national figure. And the idea of that is to look at, well, okay, so what does politics look like right in front of us in our communities? And how is it different from the way that the national narrative of politics is? Which, like, that is a major change in the last few years where we are expected to make our decisions locally based on how it plays into the political puzzle. And 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 it's also something that has also been challenged, this idea that politics are toxic everywhere. That actually wasn't necessarily the case in my district upstate, which is a purple district. It's a swing district. Of course, it's contentious. Of course, the candidates are quite harsh with each other, but not to the degree that we're seeing nationally. And so I wanted to explore like the possibility of what it looks like if we can act better in our politics. I mean, one thing that fiction does so well, especially in a political context, is to show us a dystopian, like the worst case scenario. And we're now all very good at imagining that. But I think another thing fiction can do is to imagine a better scenario and how people can make choices in their immediate relationships, either whether that's with their family, their friends, or their community, that actually improves the political landscape. So, in that sense, going back to the article, it went from this idea of satirizing this like group of gay guys, which almost felt like too easy. We can be like completely self-satirizing anyway, and
You do
that
focus on
ultimately,
the
like,
short shorts, which is very nice.
yes, of course, I love a short short. But it almost felt too easy. It felt like it wasn't offering anything. It felt like it wasn't what we needed right now, and it wasn't what I was interested in offering. And so I wanted to take a more generous approach, which actually felt somewhat more radical because I think, and this is going back to the Times review. It was interesting to me that the review seemed to think that painting a generous portrait of our community across political difference was an easy thing to do. Whereas I think actually extending empathy to our neighbors, people who are different from us, who have different politics, is the absolute hardest thing to do. The easy thing to do is to retreat into our self certainty, to stay within our bubble
Right.
of like mindedness. And so staying in relationship with people, excuse me, that we disagree with politically, that is actually the hardest thing to do. And that's what I wanted to illustrate with the story because I think we've all seen the op-eds, we've all listened to the podcasts that talk about this idea, but I think sometimes to really internalize it, we have to like see people actually enact it. We have to watch this
Mhm.
group of characters try to stay in relationship with each other even when they have these really insurmountable differences. Like they're not going to agree on politics, and the politics here, as you mentioned, like the legacy of AIDS and opioids and faith and same-sex marriage, all this stuff, like nobody's changing their mind per se, but what they are doing is they're learning to see each other differently. They're each in their own way taking small steps towards staying in relationship, which does change the temperature of the politics, which I think is the path towards making progress. And so it was definitely disappointing that that didn't seem to register. And I think also really sad, like that perspective that like a novel in a fictional town in a fictional time is supposed to be partisan.
Right. That
That
you don't
like
mention
we
Trump, that you're not having screeds or anything, yeah.
which I mean, how refreshing is that? That we don't have to like actually live with
Well,
that
I
we
will
can
say
actually
I was
yeah.
particularly impressed at your empathy with the Diane character. So for people to understand, there is a couple who are Chip and Diane. They're the straight couple at the center of this because Chip is running for office against Paul, who is the gay interloper. You actually call all of the people who come the duffels, which is like they're there for their weekend duffel bag, which I liked. I will say that it was funny you kept using the term carpetbagger because that is, a derogatory term that Southerners used for Northern people who came during the Civil War, after the Civil War. So I was like, oh, it's funny that people upstate would call people carpetbaggers when they were actually, anyway. But I like this Duffels thing. But no, you have an interesting. You inhabit Diane, who is this Christian woman who does have a bigotry, has had anti-gay agendas in the past, has a gay son that we find out. But you do this really loving portrait because, and which I thought was great because there are so many people who have moms like this or who have people that they work with, who they don't agree with, but things just aren't said. So to have to investigate that, she's not like your mom. She's not, I mean, I assume I don't know your mom, but I know she's not like your mom. So
No, my mom is a Jewish woman from Los Angeles who accepted me from the moment I came out. So Diane is the complete opposite
yeah.
of my mom.
Yeah, there's no dance in the book and there's no Jewishness really in the book. So there you
No,
go.
it's shocking. This is like completely not the first book that I that I thought I would write, but this is the one that came out.
So, so first, okay, so we're going to talk about several of the characters. I know, again, it's funny. I'm actually not that interested in the election itself, as you said. Like it's a framework. I'm really interested in the characters, right? And we have. Let's talk about Stan and Paul first. So Stan is an older gay man. He's lived through the AIDS epidemic. He's still traumatized by that. He lost a lover and friends. And Paul is his younger partner, who is the one who's a millennial who's actually running for office. And he's in his 30s. He doesn't have the same burdens, and there's this attraction. And I wanted to play a part of about kind of their kind of how they met and why they ended up together. And I know you haven't heard the audiobook yet, so you'll get to hear your narrator, who's excellent. That's let me make sure I say his name correctly. I have it right
Daniel
here.
K. Isaac.
Yes,
Daniel K. Isaac.
Daniel K. Isaac, who people might know from his recurring role on Billions and other things that he's done. So
He's
he has
currently on Elsbeth. Yeah.
yes, and on Elizabeth, and he has quite a lot cut out for him because he has to do a lot of characters. But anyway, so we're gonna hear. This is from Stan's POV at it's basically thinking back on a fancy gala.
At the gala, Paul had been seated at Stan's table, invited through a program for promising future leaders whose secondary purpose was to brighten the hall with youth, like the sprays of spirea in the centerpieces. Stan felt adrift after speaking about Asher, in no mood for vapid conversation, but Paul had nipped away at his armor. Stan was 46 then and slowly resigning himself to solitude. Paul was 25 and in possession of bubbling confidence, grand but vague political plans, and an appetite for the stuffed social schedule that Stan had tired of. They each provided what the others sought. Paul became something of an adopted puppy who forced Stan out of the house. while Stan became something of a mentor and manager, steering Paul toward experience and connections. A year later, Paul moved in. They began hosting fundraisers to build strategic relationships among political, financial, and cultural leaders, and it wasn't long before Stan was overcome with a profound new feeling toward his frisky young boyfriend. Pride. He had already felt adoration and desire, frustration and fear. Could such a young, luminous man really love a bald investor more than 20 years his senior? How long could it last? But watching Paul swim among the opinion shapers and power brokers, Stan had the sense of potential embraced.
I'll stop there. So what was it like hearing that?
It's wonderful. I love Daniel's voice. It's just so rich, and he's the sweetest guy ever. We actually both are graduates of UC San Diego in the theater and dance department. We were several years apart. We overlapped like super, super briefly, but we actually didn't really get to know each other until we were both in New York and involved in some theater stuff. But he's really the loveliest guy, and it's such a treat that he got to read this.
Well, what I love about that segment is the age difference. And I often ask people about how they navigate roles in a relationship, especially in same gender, same sex relationships. And it's a hard thing for people to admit to. My partner is 11 years older, and yet I'm the one who's in charge of all the money and all that stuff. So it's not like it's always the way you think. But that was interesting. So tell me, I mean, was this based off of conversations you've had? Like, how did you develop this dynamic?
Yeah, and my husband is also he's 8 years older than me, so obviously not quite as extreme as 20, but it's a common thing in our social circle that there are large age differences in relationships, and those relationships are long-term, wonderful marriages, seem to have great dynamics. And so it's a part of the gay community that I've always been fascinated by, and that seems quite unique. Not the age difference, obviously, lots of age differences in all communities, but I think because we're such a multi generational social community, and that within a group of friends, you can really see multiple decades represented. And so of course there's going to be romantic relationships
Mhm.
that come from that, and I was interested in what that does and what people offer each other. I think relationships, everybody brings something to it, and some of that is practical, and some of that is experiential, and some of that is the history and life experience, and but also that kind of wide-eyed newness and optimism. And one of the things that I wanted to really show, particularly in the clip that you had there, is this idea of what Paul is offering Stan as well. And he's not just a young face. This is not a purely aesthetic attraction. It is an energy. It's an enthusiasm for the future. It's somebody who is bringing Stan out of his shell, who is entrenched into his habits. And so the beauty of what they're both offering each other, both experience and connections, but also a kind of new unexpected chapter for Stan, which I think is a really beautiful thing.
I totally agree, and it's funny because when you are the puppy, as he calls him, or you call him, you don't understand why these older men are attracted to your youth. You just think it's because you're cute or whatever. And a lot of it is also this enthusiasm, especially if you've been through the hell that Stan has survived. He's a survivor of this war. He's a veteran of the AIDS epidemic, is the way I like to think of it. And to have somebody who is unencumbered and can bring that joy. I mean, it's funny that he's 46 and think that I'm actually older than that now. But I know what it's like to be around younger people as well. Now I get it. Like, I'm like, oh yeah, I like hearing how excited you are and all the things you want to do, and you're not jaded and cynical and, all that stuff. And we see that progress throughout, right? We see Stan's frustration with Paul. We see the stupidity of Paul. We see the self-sabotage moments. I'm not going to give those away, but they're really juicy. And so we see them both change as well, but still bound together. Um, for me, though, personally, the character of Will is the one I was tracking the most closely. And that is Chip and Diane's son. He's about 19, I would say. He's after the first year of college. He's back home. I remember that. when you come back after your first year of college in the summer and you're like, why did I come back? Like this is this is not it. And yet, funny enough, I had not a similar experience because I didn't have A gays in my small town, but I remember going out as a person now back from college and being more sophisticated than being around older gay men and wanting to be around all of that. And you really track Will really well. And there's a moment that I'm going to play in a second, which is at a 4th of July, a gay pool party, 4th of July, which we all, if anybody's not been at a gay pool party, you know how bacchanal it can get. So tell me about Will a little bit.
In many ways, Will was the starting point of the story. When I initially was writing this, and we can get into this, but it began as a 30-day sprint as part of National Novel Writing Month. And he was the character that brought me through that first draft because he was the one that really straddles these two worlds. And he's the
Right.
one who, and has recently come out, but in another sense is puts himself back into another closet when he hides the fact that Chip, his father, is running against his new friend, Paul. And so I was interested in, what that experience looked like for him, and also was a great kind of narrative thread to follow. And and it also just follows a classic literary trope of the young man coming into the world and figuring out who he is and what he wants, and that felt fun to write in the literary tradition too.
Well, so I'm going to play this clip from the pool party.
Summer, you can be one of my interns. Suddenly, Will Martindale has been handed future prospects that Will Riley could never have imagined. The party already feels consequential, a step toward some unknown yet promising new future. Surely that justifies his presence and lies. Paul directs Will to another batch of men for another round of introductions. Will is from here, Paul informs them, like an expat tour guide who has befriended a native and is eager to show him off. The men receive him with charitable smiles. But it's Will who feels like he's a visitor in a foreign land, a small, wealthy nation inhabited by a single-sex populace. Having never been abroad, he doesn't know the nervous thrill of encountering a new culture, aside from college, though that felt less like a new culture than a heightened, inebriated version of the one he already knew. This place feels instantly distinct. He has had to reevaluate his sense of space, his relationship to touch, his assumptions about the proper fit of swimwear. Like many first-time international travelers, he is quickly enamored of this new country and indulges the tendency to deem it superior to his own. See how they appreciate beauty. Note their unapologetic embrace of leisure. Observe their uninhibited affection toward one another. His own cultural inheritance, his upbringing in Griffin, feels bland and lacking in comparison.
It goes on and it's gorgeous. I'm very jealous of that writing, Brian. It's really, really well done.
Thank you. Thank you. I was definitely pulling from my own study abroad experience in imagining that when I was, I guess I was 19 and I just moved to Copenhagen and I was there for the year. And it was the first time experiencing European culture. And again, the reevaluating relationships to space, to touch, to clothing, and how that mimics the way that you enter a new social group, and especially as a young gay man who is brought into gay spaces for the first time. Anytime anyone's had, gone to, whether it be Fire Island, P-Town, Palm Springs, all the, or even just like a gay club, there's
Yeah.
a complete reevaluation of how you relate to people, and it is thrilling and it's confusing, and it takes an adjustment, and it is, it's a strange, beautiful thing that
But
I was hoping to
I'd
capture
never
in here.
heard anyone explain it quite that way of being in a new single sex population of a strange new land. I thought that was really, really smart. It's a great metaphor. And
Thank you.
yeah, it is true though that just so people know, what happens right before that is Will shows up at the pool party in board shorts, and they're like, "Okay, are you going to change?" And he thinks that that's appropriate, and they're like, "No, here's some sexy, fancy, probably Park and Ronan or some kind of, Andrew Christian something or other bathing suit that he then has to put on to fit in."
Which was completely my experience growing up in Southern California, which was we only wore baggy swimsuits. And to go to Europe, to live in Europe, and then to enter gay spaces where Speedos seemed to be the norm, it took me quite a while to adapt to that, to become comfortable with it. And that's such a marker of acceptance and
Right.
a change in your relationship with your own body and with other bodies. And that's that's a really big part of this uh this whole process of being absorbed into a type of gay culture. And of course, this is like a very small, narrow version of it. This is one slice of queer culture, of course.
Yeah.
But what Will is entering into is for him completely foreign.
But you do get into the nuances of different races within their group, of different money. There's another character that I'm not really, we don't have time to really go into, but who is definitely on the outside, who doesn't feel attractive enough, who doesn't feel rich enough, who's also just broken up with somebody. And so there's a lot of stuff going down. And there's another couple named Eric and Alex. Alex is Asian American, I believe, right?
Yep.
And so he has a different dynamic, but he's at a certain point, they have an open relationship. And Eric starts seeing one of the other local guys who Will went to high school with, named Dalton, which is a great name because you immediately know that guy. And so you explored open relationships and the fluidity of these dynamics as well. And I'm going to play that in a second, but uh, did you know that you were going to tackle that from the beginning, or what brought that into it?
I think similarly to the multi-generational relationships that we were talking about earlier, open relationships is just a reality of my social circle. And so if you couldn't depict a contemporary gay group of friends without at least addressing the fact that for some this is quite normal, quite a big part, and well established within the relationship. For others, not so much, but it is a dynamic that is present. And depending on the community, that might be something that the group of friends is very open about, and they're all sharing that experience. And in some communities, that might be something that is kept close to the chest, that might be kind of under the radar, and stuff that is practiced but not openly discussed. In this
Mm-hmm.
community, it's something that is accepted, that there's no stigma around that. But for Eric and Alex, it's a new part of their relationship, a new part of their dynamics. They've been together for over a decade, but because they now have this second home, because they're splitting time, they agree that separate experiences are something that they're going to explore. So when Eric does encounter Dalton and begins quite casually, it's not something that he's ashamed of. It's not something he's hiding. It's something that when Alex finds clues to their dalliances, it's not something that upends their relationship. And what I was interested in exploring is more the impact of what this relationship does in terms of shifting Eric's perspective, how it opens his eyes to dynamics in the region that he wouldn't otherwise have seen.
Mm-hmm.
And the open relationship gave me an opportunity to do that for this character without having to bring in any of the shame or stigma of what of expectations around relationships and
Yeah.
marriages.
So this is actually from chapter 10. So their relationship changes quite a bit over the course of it. So this is kind of in the earlier stages. So here we go.
I'm sorry. I don't mind. As the burgers bubble in the skillet, Eric chops vegetables for a salad, sets the table, and lights a candle. He and Alex rarely eat at the table, preferring to dine by the flickering light of the TV, whereas he and Dalton eat only at the table because it's the sole safe table in Griffin available to them. Well, isn't this fucking romantic? Dalton says when they're seated. The comment seems to indict Eric, even as he suspects that Alex would somehow be okay with this situation. Disappointed by the secrecy, perhaps, but not devastated by the affair itself. He might even support it as a necessary antic of Eric's solo summer. Alex has always been the more open between them, emotionally and experientially, which Eric credits for his own ability to embrace their relationship's newly porous borders. And for that expansion of thinking, he's appreciative. In fact, in this moment, sitting across from Dalton with a candle between them, Eric loves Alex as much as he ever has, albeit differently, with more distance, but also more depth.
So I really loved that part right there, that you actually acknowledge also that often people are like, how in the world could you have an open relationship? Doesn't it just make you jealous and drive you nuts and this and that? But in some ways, many people express how being able to have other experiences can actually make their love their primary partner even more. So thanks for bringing that in. That's a lot.
Yeah, it's I just really enjoyed that Dalton and Eric's the development of their relationship felt like it was as much about Eric and Alex's relationship, and that was interesting to explore. And Alex, I think, is a very significant character in this story. We don't see him a lot. He doesn't necessarily say a lot, but he's a character that, for me, plays quite a significant role in both his encouragement of Eric in terms of giving him the permission to spend this time away, to give him the permission to explore past his assumed borders, and also somebody whose love is like a grounding source for Eric that he really, especially later in the novel, really needs and holds on to, and becomes quite significant.
Yeah, I actually agree. And he also is a level voice at many moments where he kind of clocks people and tells them that they're wrong or that they need to shut up, and reminds them that he came from, less means and has had to deal with a lot of racism and other things as well. So I always appreciate that, where you have to kind of, draw a line in the sand or tell people that they've gone too far. So before I move to the next question, I noticed that Brandon, we have some questions from some of the people. Thanks. If you have any questions, just let us know. But he asked if this is your first novel, and we talked a little bit about that. And you mentioned that you started Town and Country almost exactly 6 years ago, at the beginning of Novel Writing Month in November. And so tell us a little bit about that journey. I know that you put it away, then picked it up in the pandemic. Then you struggled to get an agent, which you and I talked about. And I'm still at that stage after my agent ended up disappearing on me recently. So tell us about that journey. And it wasn't a straight path. It always is a windy one.
Yeah, definitely a winding road. It is my first book, my first novel, and I always wanted to write one, but did not think that this was going to be the first one. And it didn't start with the intention of getting it to this point. I did go to graduate school for creative writing. That was also kind of a strategic and convenient decision to continue living abroad. It felt like it justified my presence out of the country. At least I could justify it to my parents, which, you know, they appreciated more than me just working in a coffee shop. So I did this 2-year master's program, but simultaneously started working for a newspaper, and the journalism really picked up. So when I moved to New York 12 years ago, I very quickly had a full plate of freelance journalism and was doing that very happily all the way through the pandemic. Just before that, though, I had an itch to do more creative writing. I did want to go back to some fiction, and I'd learned about National Novel Writing Month, which unfortunately no longer exists, but it had been around for 30 years or so. And in the month of November, everybody, regardless of their experience or their level of ambition, anybody who wants to write a novel, you just spit out 50,000 words in 30 days, and then you have a novel. And of course, it's a complete mess. And maybe that's good enough. You accomplished it. You wrote your novel, and I think for me that's what I thought it was. And as we spoke about earlier, writing a story about an election just gave me a very clear. It gave me a very clear narrative. It gave me a cast of characters. It gave me a bunch of themes to work with. So it was a very convenient way to approach a story. Then my husband read it and he really liked it and encouraged me to pursue it, which I said, okay, sure. At some point I'll pick it up again. 3 months later, the pandemic shuts everything down because I was writing so much about performance and all that went away. The most of my planned articles went away, but I had this rough draft. And so I decided this is my time and I'm going to develop it. And so I spent a full year basically trying to treat it as my full-time job and got it to a point where I felt I'd gotten it ready to start sending out to agents. I started that process very optimistically, and it took me 2 years to finally get literary representation. And then once I did, we made some edits. They very optimistically sent it out on submission to a bunch of editors. And again, we heard nothing. It was crickets for the first round of submissions. So it actually took me a full year to sell it. And once I did, then we went through several rounds of edits. Then it goes into a lengthy production process, which took us to this past Tuesday, which, as you said, was exactly 6 years from the November that I first started this.
I just think it's good for people to hear and be reminded that there's a lot of bumps along the road, and also the process is important. And you learn things and you change things, and you're like, oh, I'm glad that that draft didn't get published because now I made it better. And that even when you think it's done, it's not done.
Exactly. Yeah. And people who I thought would be my dream agents who didn't respond or who rejected it, it feels like a blow and you keep going. And it's a bit of a cliche that everybody says in publishing, you only need one person to say yes. And in my case, this was true both in terms of representation and in terms of selling it. I did not get multiple offers at any point. I did not have my choice of agents. I did not have my choice of editors. I got one offer of representation. I got one offer on the book. And both of them were incredible. They were just the right people for
Right.
this book. They saw it, they knew what I was trying to do, they were supporting me all the way through, and they had faith in me and in this book, and it took a long time to get to them, they but that's ultimately how it turned out, and I am so grateful for that duration of waiting and wishing.
I always use dating metaphors, even though it's been so long since I personally dated, because it's the same thing. Like you have to go out on a lot of dates and meet people to know what things, and you don't show up on a first date and say, "Let's get married." At least, hopefully, you don't. And that's what an agent has to also figure out, because you're basically getting married for at least a while, and it's a big commitment. So, yeah, it's just as frustrating as dating. So, good luck, everybody. Uh,
Yeah, and it can be fun too.
yeah.
There's a lot about the process that I actually really enjoyed. I loved researching agents and seeing all the authors that they represent, and there's also a way in which, of course, I don't know if it's a cliche or the way that we talk about the one person who's kind of right for you. And I'm not sure that I entirely believe that. I think you can connect with a lot of different people and you can find commonality and um, you can build strong feelings and emotional relationships with a lot of different people. And I think it's similar in any industry where the agents and the editor that I ended up with were absolutely wonderful. Doesn't necessarily mean that they were the only ones, doesn't necessarily mean that if it hadn't happened with either, that I wouldn't have eventually found somebody else. So I think it's patience. I think it's persistence. I think it's staying open and available. And I think it's also I think it's also the willingness to continue to work on the writing at each stage in between rejections. I would continue to do revisions and do passes based on any feedback that I received. So after our first round of submissions to editors came up empty-handed, I took very small nuggets of feedback that we had gotten, and I did a pretty dramatic another rewrite in which I wrote a whole new first 3 chapters to reintroduce the characters in a way that felt easier for the reader to receive, and whether or not that ultimately made the difference. But I think there's something to be learned at every stage, and something to be gained even from the rejections. And so it's perhaps easy to say in retrospect, looking backwards, but but to see each of it as part of the journey that will eventually take you to the place that you want to be is it's the only way to approach it, because otherwise you'll drive yourself mad.
I agree, and I know I want to have a couple more questions before I let you go, and I know you have probably something fun to do after this, but I'm always curious. I mean, you have had to think long and deep about these relationships. You present many different types of loving relationships, queer relationships, straight ones. How do you think about love? And like, how I always ask everybody, how do you define love? Is it that moment of spark and excitement? Is it the long term gradual? How do you define it?
I'm not sure this is going to come across as a definition, but
You
for
don't have to
me,
define. Yeah.
yeah, for me, love is, um, I think, should be easy. I think in the relationships that I've had that have been the most successful, and in my current relationship, in my marriage, we've been together for 12 years now, I'm married for 7, and there was just a real immediate ease in our dynamic. And I think, and that's what I look for. I look for that stability. I look for somebody who wants to make my life better, and and to make my life easier, and who I want to make their life easier too. And so it's never a burden to take that extra step, to take something off their plate, to make sure that I am being as available as I can be. And my husband is just the absolute best at putting my happiness front of mind, really. And it's all I could ever ask for. And he's taught me and showed me how to do it too. And so the result is that our relationship just feels, it feels easy. It feels smooth. I think some people perhaps mistake drama and the intensity of that for a type of passion, a type of, if it feels this much, then that feeling must be something. And for me, I like the feeling of love to feel like a calmness.
I
And
love that
that's what
you
I
say it that
seek.
way too. When I was in college, I remember an English professor, we were studying D.H. Lawrence's The Rainbow, and I remember him putting a line on the board and like having this flat line and then having one with these spikes or whatever. And he was like, which one do you rather have? Do you want to have this drama and blah, 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 or do you want to have the peaceful, tranquil thing? And most people said they wanted the drama. And I probably thought that at the time as well, because I was in a very dramatic relationship with a boyfriend in college, and then learned, oh, actually, that's not the way it has to be.
And and maybe it's temperamental, because both of us are Virgos, so maybe it's just kind of how we're
Oh,
predisposed.
see, that's funny because
But
my husband and I are both Geminis. I think maybe you have to date your own sign sometimes.
maybe that's the key. Maybe that's what we've unlocked. Yeah.
The other thing I'm just curious is, I mean, I always want us to be good cultural and literary citizens. So, are there any things that you read that helped you or that influenced you, or any pivotal kind of pop culture things, books or TV or anything that you liked and or you want to recommend to others?
Well, every time I'm working on a writing project, or at least for this one, I like to create a reading list of different books that will influence me. And so this one was a really fun one. Everything from Andrew Sean Greer for Less, which I absolutely adore,
Yep.
and Armistead Maupin, who's Tales of the City. Obviously, the collection of characters and the exploration of both community and individuality was a huge influence. Even Gary Steingart, Our Country Friends, also a kind of
Hmm.
upstate novel. And I love, and Gary doesn't fit into this, but the lineage of queer literature that I loved, that I've always loved reading, and that I did want to be in conversation with. And so starting back with E.M. Forrester and how he influenced Christopher Isherwood, who influenced, some of the ones that we talked about, into Andrew Holleran, Larry
Mhm.
Kramer, Alan Hollinghurst, and the different ways that they've written about gay community and gay lives and gay relationships. And so, having read all that and wanting to create a community for this novel that was building on to what they've explored and putting it in a contemporary setting with the issues that affect us today. So whether that be now the legacy of AIDS, whether or not that now be, at least for this group of mostly gay, wealthy white men, a degree of political power, and what do they do with that? And also the new dynamics of relationships and how that affects the community and how that's also perceived from the outside. And that was also part of the project, is to not look at us from an insular bubble, to only look at our own friends and our own community, but to imagine what our neighbors perceive us and what happens when that bubble is burst and we bring that into relationship with them as well.
Yeah, I mean, it is a good lesson in just being a good neighbor. That's what the book also gets at, right? Well, I think it's definitely excellent part of this lineage. I agree with you. I think people should go and read Town and Country. They should listen to it. If you want to hear Daniel K.
Sure.
Isaac, yes, show them Town and Country. It's hardback. I'm sure it'll be in paperback by next year, which
Next
is what everyone
summer,
always wants.
yes.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
The paperback will be your summer read.
Oh, good, perfect. It is
Yeah.
a good. I'm not going to say it's not like a breezy beach read, but it is a very dynamic and propulsive story. So I definitely agree that you could have it at the pool and look smart, but also it's kind of sexy at the same time.
I love that. It's a
All right,
great
well,
endorsement. Thank you.
thanks, Brian, and talk to you later.
The
Bye,
same one.
everyone.
Thanks so much, Jerry. This was great.